Hello, everybody, and we're live. DictionBuddy has prepared a wonderful one-on-one podcast today with Peter Mark. Peter, hello.
Thank you for inviting me. You do such wonderful work in DictionBuddy. It's just great.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We're actually very excited to have you. And before we jump in, let us take a second to let people join us. We welcome anybody and everybody who is interested in opera, voice, and certainly hearing about your experiences. Please, let's just let them in and we can begin. So you're in California right now, Peter.
I am. Should I show you around?
I'd love that. Where exactly? Where are you?
Playa del Rey. It's on the ocean in Los Angeles on the west side, right under the marina. And basically, this is Playa del Rey. There's the boat entry, then the marina, then Venice, then Santa Monica, then Pacific Palisades, and like that.
Nice, nice. New York is
sunshine.
We got it as well in New York. But I know you from New York, so you actually spend a lot of time in New York as well, right?
Well, we live in New York. We're in the Ansonia, but Thea is from Scotland, and she's not used to the extreme weather in New York, neither the snow in the winter or the humidity in the summer. So we come back and spend 2 months or so a year in the winter here and in the summer. And otherwise, we're in the Ansonia in New York, and that's where we live. But because of the pandemic this year, we've been here since February 1st, 14 months ago.
Oh, boy.
Of course, everything is different right now, but that's part of what we're going to speak about. And I've learned how to do the Zoom and teach classes, lessons, and individual classes over Zoom.
Yeah. And for those who don't know, Thea Musgrave is a wonderful composer and Peter's wife.
Yes.
Well, wonderful. We're getting people in, and I think we can really begin this one-on-one podcast with you, Peter. Let me please just say a few words about you, and then we can hear from, so to speak, the horse's mouth. Would be really excited to hear your insight. Peter Mark had served for over 35 years as founding general artistic director and chief conductor of Virginia Opera from 1975 to 2010. And now he's an emeritus. And he's known to have really provided the breaking grounds for some of the biggest names in opera nowadays, such as Renee Fleming, Diana Soviero, Lawrence Brownlee, and many others. He has had exposure to opera early on, and I'll let you speak about that. I don't want to give it out. It's a very interesting story. However, I'm going to say this. He also served as a concert master of the Columbia University Orchestra and principal violinist of the Juilliard Orchestra and the Chicago Lyric Opera, as well as later on, professor of music and drama at the University of California at Santa Barbara. And Peter is known essentially all over the world and has taught and performed on 5 different continents, from New York, from Northern America to Southern America to Africa and to Asia. And with that, Peter, I would like for you to please tell us, how did you start in opera?
Well, I've had a passion for opera since early days. Probably I was around 9 or 10 years old. My mother was a pianist, but she wasn't particularly well trained, which is why she decided to send me to Juilliard. But I remember lying under the piano as she was practicing and just music allows your imagination and your emotions free rein. And it was just a fabulous experience. So when she brought home and played the long playing records of Aida with Renata Tebaldi and Delmonico, and I was watching with a libretto, I just fell in love. I was used to practicing violin. And so I had a musical background, but the fact that music had words and characters and it was a human situation seemed to me to be the perfect art form, and I connected immediately. I did sing a lot with my families on trips just to spend time in the car. And so when Chet Allen, the original Amal, lost his voice at New York City Opera, uh, Menotti was auditioning
Hmm.
for replacements. My mother set me up there to go, and sure enough, I wound up as the understudy of Amal at New York City Opera, and they used me. Rosemary Kuhlman was the very first mother, and then I was able to work with the understudy, Patricia Neway, and at that time, it was exciting because I was singing a leading role at the age of 12, which Thomas Shippers was conducting, and this Patricia Neway had a gorgeous voice. And so while I was understudying at City Opera, two things. They put me in all the children's choruses, and I got involved with Carmen and all of the places that had children's choruses. And then the other thing was that what happened after Amal, it was on a double bill with the medium.
Hmm.
And you can imagine what impact a
Yeah.
work like that had on a 12-year-old. I was just startled. And
Hmm.
the next season, I guess City Opera didn't do Amal, and my mother trotted me off to the Metropolitan Opera. And I auditioned, and Maestro Tauzik was then the head of the children's chorus. I got right in, but they asked me to come and audition again for something special that they wouldn't tell me.
Hmm.
Well, make a long story short, in the middle of a Carmen rehearsal with Fausto Cleva, oh no, it was Pierre Monteux and Risa Stevens and Tucker and Robert Merrill. On a break, they wheeled the piano on the stage. My mother, who'd never played professionally, really, sat down and accompanied me playing Don't Cry, Mother Dear from Amal. Well, this then enabled me to be on the 70th anniversary of the Met on the Ed Sullivan Show that was broadcast directly from the Metropolitan Opera stage, of course, the old Met.
It's amazing.
As Sieppe was singing Boris, there were three scenes, something from Carmen, the Rigoletto Quartet, and then the final scene of Boris. And
Hmm.
I got to do Feodor because they thought that the cameras would see that it was a mature mezzo-soprano who used to be doing all of those roles at the Met. But for this last scene, they put me in. And so that's how my career as a soloist at the Met began. Then I got to do, oh, so many wonderful operas. The Bohème cast was Tebaldi with Tucker and Merrill, or Lisha Albanese with Björling. Every night was a different fabulous opera. The Mozarts was sung by Eleanor Stever. I was in Andrea Chenier with Delmonico and Milanov, Gioconda with Björling and Milanov. I mean, I stayed, and eventually I became the shepherd boy. Dmitri Metropolis, who was conducting a new production of Tosca at the old Met in 56, insisted on having a boy's voice. So Rosalind Elias was doing the shepherd boy at that time, but she had graduated onto bigger roles like Erica in Vanessa. And of
Yeah.
course, I went to all of these performances. I knew how to sneak in to the Met through the back door also at the time, and how to go to rehearsals I wasn't involved in. So I had a great time for 3 years there. And I sang shepherd boy at the Met in that season, and my voice was getting richer and richer as it was changing. And I just lost the top, the
Mhm.
uh, before the last performance. So Rosalind Elias had to go back in. And she had graduated already. So then Maestro Tauzik told me that I needed to keep my voice shut. Don't
Mhm.
use it during the break, that I could ruin it.
Mhm.
And I think I understand his point of view, but I actually think that was the wrong advice because I lost all the musculature
Mhm.
there. And I know that George London was a voice soprano and sang right through the break. And my voice was getting richer and lower all the time. So there was no reason to stop. In any case, I stopped because I very much wanted to sing later on. So I put all my uh, enthusiasm and energy into getting to be a good violinist and a good violist, because early in Juilliard, I had switched to viola, and it's as principal violist of the Juilliard Orchestra and lyric opera that I really got back into opera. But when I was 18, like 3 years after the voice changed, I went to try to study, and it was with a kind of stout, super mature Wagnerian bass baritone who was using his voice like a frog and making a gorgeous sound. And he kept telling me to manipulate my palate, like a crab.
Mhm.
And I swear I hadn't a clue what he was talking about then. Now I know, because
Interesting.
getting back into the field of opera and running an opera company and working with singers, and my love is really to try to get singers free, and so their musical expression and emotional expression and vocal technique is all one piece integrated together. So I really realized with this singing teacher that I really didn't feel I could do it. And I was 18, so I thought, well, just focus on the instruments. And the bottom line is I became eventually that teacher I was looking
For yourself and for others.
for others,
You
because
created my
I,
passion.
I listened to so many singers,
Mhm.
not only at the old Met, and I stayed to the end of every performance, and you could actually stand in the wings in the old Met. It wasn't so huge and bureaucratic. I actually, when I finished singing the Shepherd Boy, I'd come and watch the rest of the third act from the wings, and you know, or Carmen, and I saw very close the interaction of the singers and what they did, and I absorbed a lot more than I could articulate at that age, but about the position of the body and in support, and how they really got such a rich, free sound that could also be intimate, but that cut over the orchestra without any pressure.
Yeah, I think
That
mhm. It's an
that is essential for a singer.
I think it's an appropriate place to actually speak about the voice and then talk about how you moved into conducting, because you named some incredible artists that we admire. Like, how many have you seen? You named a few, and Siepi and Milanov, and
Oh God, so many. They night after night in the mid '50s, the Met had the best cast. Lisa de la Casa sang the Massenet Manon. The Desgrieux was Bierling. I mean, I heard my first Wagner live there, and it was Eileen. Eileen Farrell was singing it, but also, oh, that teacher, the teacher from Philadelphia, who was singing all the Wagner roles, and I just very, very good teacher as well. But she was great, to the degree that when I first heard Birgit Nielsen, who came my last season, I thought she really wasn't Wagnerian because that voice was cleaving the air like a trumpet.
hmm,
And I loved her in the Turandot's with Corelli, who looked like Nureyev. I mean, it was just phenomenal, those performances. But so I heard a lot. But then, working with singers for 35, 36 years at the Virginia Opera, and, we were able to launch a lot of careers and give a lot of important singers their feet on roles, because we could do as many as, once we were up and running in 3 cities, Norfolk, Richmond, and Fairfax, we would offer a young singer 10 performances of a leading role that they might not have done before. And they got all of these reviews. At that time, there were 2 newspapers in each of those cities, at least 2 in the Washington area. And so they got all of these different reviews, all of the experience singing that role 5 times in Norfolk, eventually in the Harrison Opera House, which we built or renovated, and then in Richmond's Carpenter Center, and then in the Center for the Arts in Fairfax at George Mason University.
Mm-hmm. Peter, you were in a powerful position of casting and hiring singers.
Yeah.
From your perspective, having heard the golden age voices and being on the stage of the Met yourself, even though as a boy, but really haven't heard what it takes to sing opera, how did you determine who deserved to be on stage for each particular role? I think it's very important to understand the thought process from a conductor's perspective.
Well, I must have heard 500 singers every season in New York, mm-hmm. at that time live. And a lot of them would be recommended by their managers for specific roles, but others would have written in without management, and there was something in their resume that my staff and I felt we should hear this person. And what I was really looking for was the basic quality of the voice, whether it was evenly produced or not. Mm-hmm. It became kind of a joke, because if I liked someone, I would ask them for more than the 2 arias. So people were astounded that I might listen to 5 things from them. I mean, not all the way through, but the reason I was doing that was to get a feel for how flexible they were. And then I would go up and ask them for certain things and see if I thought a singer mm-hmm. had the basis of a fabulous voice and was flexible enough to respond and work. I knew that I could get the ones that I knew I could get ready in the 3-week or 4-week rehearsal period that we had for all of those performances. I just knew they would be better than the people I couldn't afford who've already done the roles and were known for them. I mean, a case, for instance, that Diana Soviera was my first Violetta. Now, she had done Violetta before in English on tour with Guldovsky. But we gave her, and this was the first production I ever conducted in Virginia Opera in June of 1975, we gave her her first Violetta in Italian. Mm-hmm. And she was sensational. With her was Jake Gardner and Raymond Gibbs, who was at that time a compromario tenor at the Metropolitan Opera singing Cassio in Otello. And then Fred Birchnell came, Janine Altmeyer, Ashley Putnam in the early period, and then eventually Barbara Dever, Brian Jade, Brian Register, who's singing Tristan all over Europe now, was Don Jose for us. I mean, we've had Lawrence Brownlee. Actually, I hired him to sing his first Almaviva. So he signed the contract with me, but it was a year before he was to do it. And in the interim, he got the opportunity to sing it at La Scala. Imagine how thrilled I was to have someone who will have already done the role come in La Scala.
But when you hired him, first thing, he was not,
no.
right? He
No.
didn't have that kind of experience. So you kind of took a leap of faith, and you were absolutely right about that.
Well, when I heard Renee Fleming in audition, she had just come back from Europe,
Mm-hmm.
and she uh, she sang, and she had a gorgeous voice with a real secure technique. She wasn't the glamorous Renee Fleming that we know today, um, but I knew I needed that voice in the Carmen as Frasquita
Mm-hmm.
because of the high C's at the end of the second act.
Mm-hmm.
And so I hired her on the spot out of that audition, gave her 3 roles. Frasquita covering Micaela and Carmen. Then she sang Belle with my wife, Thea Musgrave, conducting her own Christmas carol,
Mm-hmm.
the leading lady in that. And then her first Pamina. And we I didn't have to, but I did release her from the first week of our rehearsals in Pamina for Pamina, because I knew she had come totally well prepared for the other 2 assignments.
Mm-hmm.
Because in Houston Grand Opera, where she was in the Young Artist program, they had a cancellation in the role of the Countess. And Houston Grand Opera gave her the opportunity to sing her first Countess on Houston Grand Opera stage, and that launched her international career. And she
Mm-hmm.
came immediately from that to sing her first Pamina with us.
That's wonderful. So, in terms of transitioning from that time, let's watch a little clip that we prepared so we can leave that section of your experience, and maybe you can speak a little bit. We have a little excerpt from Electra. Let me, yes.
I want to just say, Electra was my favorite opera all through my teenage years. I don't know what that says about my family relations, but so it was that Electra spoke to me, and Salome. I
Mm-hmm.
think these are pinnacle works where the music and drama came into absolute synthesis, where they supported each other perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a thrill for me to be able to renovate the Opera House in Norfolk and get the pit expanded and sunk so that I could get the Electra Orchestra in there in the reduction, which is for 72, that he himself wrote, Strauss. I hired a fabulous stage director, Lillian Groag, and that's another story. I gave her first opportunities in opera. But by this point, she had done a lot of opera, and I believe she, coming from the theater world as an actress, a playwright, and a director, she was perfect. What I want you to see in this, the excerpt that I chose, which is really under 2 minutes, shows a set by John Conklin, which allowed us to do a lot with lighting when things got emotional, and then dump the lighting out when it was more realistic.
Mm-hmm.
Is the moment when Electra, having approached gingerly her mother, Clytemnestra, knowing that she has been dreaming bad dreams of Orestes coming back to kill her because he's the eldest son, and Clytemnestra had her husband, his father, murdered.
What I,
Cunning Electra uh, pulls her into a little tete-a-tete, uh, and then eventually says, "Will you let my brother come home?" And
mm-hmm.
she gets very tense, and finally she gets very defensive and says, "Well, she's in charge here, and she's protected because Electra says, I know that you've dreamed of him." So it's their power play in that scene is phenomenal psychologically. And what happens at this moment is Electra is in charge and has the power, visualizing in music and what she's singing, Orestes finally coming and killing Clytemnestra. Clytemnestra is on the floor and really down, but then suddenly someone comes through the door, and her servants tell whisper in her ear, and suddenly she changes mood. They've actually told her that Orestes is dead and that someone is here to explain it to her. And so she gets herself together, leaves in triumph, and laughs at Electra, who then is totally confused. So there is some singing in this, but what I wanted to show is how the stage director, the lighting, and the scenery all are part of opera. But you'll hear the phenomenal voice Pamela Kucinich, who is singing Electra, and Barbara Dever as Clytemnestra.
Wonderful. Thank you. So let me share what we've prepared here. And Peter conducting.
This is in the opera house that we,
Okay.
Good. She's calling for more light, and watch how the light on the scenery changes.
I think that's a good segment. Peter, would you talk maybe a little bit about big voices? I think it's a good spot to do that since you're involved in
I love big voices.
teaching.
And I like lyric voices too. But the works, with a lyric voice, it's harder to have the kind of activity in the pit that there is in Wagner and heavy Strauss. Maybe not totally true, because I think there are a lot of lyric sounds that are so perfectly produced that they can be heard through any orchestral texture. But because of my experience at the Met, I basically hear the potential in every voice that I work with. And I can sense where there may be some obstruction and help free it. And that inevitably adds technical flexibility so that you can be intimate as well as loud and commanding over a big orchestra and still be heard.
Mhm.
And I do love the uniqueness of each individual voice. That's what struck me. You can call them all sopranos, but the difference between Stieber, Nielsen, Margaret Harshaw, that's the one I was talking about.
Yes, yes,
She was
Margaret.
doing all the Wagner, and she was spectacular.
Big dramatic
And,
voice, yeah. Hmm.
yeah, and Zinka Milanoff, and Beverly Sills, Joan Sutherland. These were all singing at the same time. Lisa Della Casa. Oh, they're all sopranos, but they each not only had their own fach or subset, but they what was released when they sang was their individual resonance that was true to their own physical architecture, both in their resonators and the way they used them physically. And I believe so many of the singers that I heard then at the Met were able to do so much because they supported their voice for a large house.
Hmm.
I think it's very dangerous. I've known a lot of singers who have earned very good money in Phantom of the Opera. But when you do, and I've hired some of them to do their opera roles with us in Virginia, but when you sing on the mic 8 shows a week, you learn how to you disconnect the support from the voice in order to survive, and also because it's not necessary on a mic. But there is nothing to me that replaces the visceral quality of a person marshaling their forces in a house the size of the Met, the old Met, that was 3,700 seats. So for them to be heard over a huge orchestra like the Strauss or Wagner and still cleave the air is amazing. I remember hearing Renata Tebaldi cleaving her high C over the orchestra and chorus in the in Aida, in the scenes just before in the first act. You didn't hear a note of the orchestra when that voice finally attacked and swelled.
Over it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that is something very few instruments can do. Now, I've spent decades working with orchestras and developing my technique on my instrument. But what I love about the voice is that it has both the intimacy and the power, and with words, the specific dramatic intention that is not possible with instruments. I love chamber music and I love the symphonic repertoire, but it doesn't communicate as specifically the human dilemma as opera does. And there's something visceral, like the primal scream,
Mm-hmm.
about opera. And I'm uncomfortable when singers have not gotten to that place in the relationship between their support and their placement.
Well, that's a good point, actually. It's very interesting. You've heard that many of the greatest singers of previous generations.
Yeah, this close, like with less than 6 feet, I could have caught something from them.
And so now when you work with modern singers, what do you see is potentially lacking, but also what new generation brings that potentially was not there previously? Like, we all unique in our delivery, but I also want to talk about the vocal tradition from before and now. And that's the first question. The second one, what a singer must do today to get to the point of what is considered to be great operatic singing and not cut corners, and how do they get there? What advice would you give?
Well, those are two related but different questions. And I would say this: what I was impressed with in my early career, hearing those great voices, was the capability of the voices. And because we had great conductors in the pit, the musical experience was extraordinary. What was perhaps missing then that now we have in the field is a more consistent understanding that the dramatic aspects of the opera and the staging should be as carefully worked and achieved as what a singer does vocally with the music. And so I do think a lot of more contemporary opera and singers now in the 21st century, certainly, that it's not a question for them. They do develop those dramatic skills and that relationship with the other characters that sometimes was missing from the Met stage in the mid 50s. But that has also at times gone into excess on the other side in this way that uh, there was a whole emphasis on the singing actor.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that that does a service to the opera field. I'd rather call it an acting singer.
Right.
Because the singing is primary. And so there aren't but so many people that can sing the role of Turandot or Isolde, but there are a lot of people that could act it.
Yeah.
So that's why I think the singers have to be actors and the stage directors have to be able to coordinate a production considering the integration, which is really why I chose the clip of Electra, because to me, that integration of elements, vocal, lighting, the scenery, the orchestra, it all coordinates to a much greater impact. And that's what singers need to be prepared to do now. On the other hand, you've got to realize that there are works like the As One, um, which take only two singers and a string quartet, and it's still called an opera.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that economics always has a very big role in what opera companies produce. And of course, after the First World War, the budgets of opera companies were greatly diminished, and we had a lot of chamber works. Strauss wrote Ariadne, auf Naxos for chamber orchestra, but Stravinsky, The Soldier's Tale of Stravinsky was for more instruments than the As One, but it was never called an opera or produced as an opera in an opera house until maybe recently in smaller houses. And yet, something with forces today that are less than that is called an opera. So
Yeah.
singers do have a choice of being in a variety of repertoires. But for opera, I mean, I think you cannot compare a very small work or a folk opera to the different layers of European opera in its grandest form into the 19th, 20th century, because it's a much more complicated art form and it's layered. And I think that singers now should not lose sight of the golden age of vocalism, that they will not lose anything by doing that. They'll have more flexibility. Look, Renee Fleming was earning her living in Europe before she came back as a scat singer. Well, she sang every night in these clubs to
Mm-hmm.
earn her money. That gave her a real knowledge of her own voice. It's like she developed body English on her voice. And scat singing and jazz singing, on that kind of a schedule, basically, I think is a major part of how she became so technically astute and focused, that when she steps foot on the stage, she doesn't have a worry in her mind about technical things, or
Right.
should, because she knows what she's doing.
You
So
know what?
I,
Yeah, go ahead, please.
well, I've spoken for all of you. I'm anxious for your question.
No. I just wanted to make a point that in that clip that we've seen with Electra, right? You mentioned the great work of the stage director and the lighting. And what I noticed as a singer myself, that the Electra and Clytemnestra, they were not singing while lying down. The singing Wagner requires a lot of effort, stamina, and delivering the sound consistently. And the fact that the stage director in that particular segment did not require the singer lying down and singing her part, but rather allowed her to get up and then deliver the line, I think speaks for itself.
Yeah. Well, you have to work with the singers in front of you, with what their voice is, where they're comfortable, what tempo you might need to stretch a little at times to show the best of what they can do, and maybe move a little underneath things that would give them more momentum toward the climactic part. I mean, all of these things are what distinguish an opera conductor from a symphony conductor.
Mm-hmm.
And they're very important.
I would like for you to see a comment we received from Allison.
Oh, God, that's so nice. Allison, thank you so much.
We join current sentiment, Peter. Why don't we take a look? Maybe tell us how you work with singers today, and then we can take a look at one of your master classes in China.
Oh, okay. Well, of course, while I was at Virginia Opera, I would choose the singers that I knew I could work with and improve greatly during the rehearsal period. And the work didn't stop at the premiere. If we had 10 performances, we always had eight to 10 performances. The Electra was 8 performances. I would continue giving notes to orchestra and singers between performances, because it was a chance to really refine what you can do and continue working on it. And things just got better and better. And I just loved doing that. So
when you have a singer who comes to you, I'm sorry, what do you pay attention first to? The voice, diction, physicality, how they move, their musicality. What exactly are you assessing?
Of course, for 36 years at Virginia Opera, I was looking to cast certain roles, and I would make notes. I would look at the singer and really try to focus totally on them, so that you kind of put yourself inside of their body and mind to feel what they're doing, as well as listening and watching. You just focus totally. It might be interesting for you to understand that the first audition I went to was at Santa Fe, and I remember there were heads of companies in the audience with their little notepads and the resumes. While the singers were singing, they were focused on the resume,
Mm-hmm.
where they had sung the role before. That didn't interest me, because I knew if they were already known for the role, it was probably I couldn't afford them. So I'm looking to focus on them and see what potential they had and what they were showing. I had forced myself to comment on a variety of things, and it might be interesting since maybe other people are doing the same thing. The first category was voice.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote down there the color and potential of the voice. And then a second category, I think, was musicianship. Oh, no, technique. So I separated the voice potential from technique. That allowed me to keep a record of how reliable the singer would be technically. The third category was dramatic, a comment on the dramatic delivery.
Mm-hmm.
Another was physicality, where I would try to basically, if you had a fabulous tall Turandot, you needed to get a tall Koloff. So I tried to make a note of that. And then musicianship was right there on the bottom, but really important. I forced myself to comment on that just before I checked one of three boxes. H, which was higher, P, which was possible, and I would put the roles they were possible with. And when this finally got digitized and loaded in by my wonderful assistant, Joe Walsh, we could come up in any opera with people we had heard before where I had recommended certain roles. And the third one was NA, no action.
What about diction? Which category it fell?
Diction was also there. Yeah, you're right.
Would you speak a little bit about that when you hear a voice and everything is there or seems to be there except for clarity of diction? What happens in your mind?
Well, I think diction is very related to, there are two parts of diction. One is the accuracy of the language, which is exactly what DictionBuddy is all about. Because unless you project words that people who speak the language can understand, you're not really speaking the language or singing in the language. But more importantly, the relationship of diction to vocal placement is not well enough understood. Once your voice is really in a high enough position and flowing, the more diction you have, the more you can sustain that high placement like that. See, I always say Americans, we sort of puff every syllable onto the floor, and it just drops, and there's no connection. You can't make a legato there. Ma, quando si parla italiano, when you speak Italian, then you connect to the vowels, and there you have a legato, and you hear every consonant, but they're not exploded, they're imploded. They go the other way. So you've got to be careful with diction on a T. It's got to be 49% D. So your mouth has got to be in a position to do a D, and then at the last second, high up, T, T, T. But if you're doing T, then it's not going to come out. The vowel's going to drop right too low. So I think there are a lot of vocal issues that are connected to diction. And I think it would be ideal to discuss that connection in detail with people, maybe a forum or some classes on that interrelationship. I think that's a very misunderstood topic, because people think they're doing diction very well when they're swallowing it.
But not at the expense of the voice. And I think that's the major foundational point that you're making. And I fully agree. As a singer, the staff, where the notes are on the staff, also dictates what you're going to do. If I'm speaking Russian, that I can be responsible for when I say this, because I'm a native Russian. If I exaggerate my diction at the expense of the vocal line, or at the expense of actually having the sound that is required on high B or high C, it's not going to be thrilling, and it's not good, because it takes the voice out of alignment. So all of it really is important to bring together. And I'd like to show your masterclass in China right now. Would you like to give us a little preface about that?
I had the opportunity through a Chinese-based Sun Yu, who I hired to sing Timur in Turandot and the Bonds in Madame Butterfly. I guess I was way ahead of racial casting, huh?
You were just casting good singers. That should be the real reason to cast someone.
That's it. Well, they were the best. He was the best for these two roles. But, you know, in any case, that's a different subject.
Yes.
So I went to China, and here at the Shanghai Opera, and I went several places in Beijing and Shanghai. At the Shanghai Opera, the head of the company, Zhang Guoyang, who was head of the company and is still music director and a wonderful conductor and person, he brought me in to do the master classes. But he presented all of the top leading singers of the Shanghai Opera together in a master class. Now, you know how that would never happen in the West. Because singers, especially if they're professional and they've been singing on stage, you have to protect their professionalism and their ego. But here in China, Chinese are very hardworking and they're very competitive. But these people have found they're in competition with the best version of themselves. So they don't compare themselves with other people the same way we do. When they were so focused on these lessons. So here is one of the two leading tenors, this one being more on the lyric side, and Wei Song, who is more dramatic, who I also coached in these classes. But here is Qi Liming, who presented Nessun Dorma in one of the rehearsal rooms of the Shanghai Opera. And I work with him to try to free that bright sound placement that will allow him to really attach his body fully and have the diction clean. I notice when you speak, you are really hitting exactly the right place here that's the most resonant. Even though sometimes, because you don't have to, you can also allow it to drop here. But people who really just don't even use that are hard to understand. Wow. And that won't work for opera singing. And I think, not that Qi Liming does that, but I think I was able to communicate to him with Sun Yu translating exactly the difference in the beginning of Nessun Dorma.
We're going to have a few little excerpts, so let's begin from the very beginning of the master class. Excuse me.
It's not on the screen.
So once more, you want to clarify.
It's not playing?
It's playing, but it's not being seen.
I'm sorry, just a second. Pardon the technical.
Well, we hear it, but we don't see it.
Yeah. We will in a second. Apologies for that. We're ready. Okay. Now we see it, right? Can you see it?
Yes,
Great.
We do.
Let's begin.
So once more, you want to clarify. Make it clean up there. That's it.
It rings now.
Same place. First Nessun Dorma was perfect. Right to the back. You just go with them. And then just leave your voice there. That's it. Right in position, sing. So you don't want to go quality,
See how differently resonant that the bottom suddenly is completely different and matches the freedom of the top. Well, nobody wants to hear Nessun Dorma without the very end. So why don't we, after working with him, I think he really got it. I was thrilled with him.
Okay.
And by the way, I brought him to Virginia. I gave him a role, but let's talk about it after. Because I
Sure.
was so happy to meet him here.
Okay, the ending is coming here. Peter, I must ask you this. So what were you doing with his body? You were trying to get him settled, the arm. This is your technique. Would you explain a little bit more?
Well, you know, it's interesting because with Zoom, you can't do it. I had to find a way to do it. And you can do it without touching. But actually, I found with the Chinese, they have marvelous voices because the shape of the skull, like the Mexican indigenous people, is quite cavernous up here. I don't know if you ever noticed that a Chinese chorus has an extraordinary tenor section. Every tenor is able to sing Nessun Dorma, whether they're leggero or dramatic. It's an extraordinary architecture up here that gives them access in a different way. But what I was doing, just going up to the B flat, you notice I pulled his arm down so that he would prepare in advance.
Physically.
Physically, yes. In other words, if he didn't get his body down early enough, he would have gone up this way.
Yeah, and the lines.
Because I spoke to him about the placement space, the back space being wide open and up, and the body going down, keeping the curve in your body in the back so that your weight is really carried on the floor. And then I found, because I'm working with fabulous Mexican singers right now, the oldest one has really got a voice between Domingo and Pavarotti, can do either repertoire.
Oh, wow.
He just, without ever having seen me, because I've only known him on Zoom, go up and work with singers physically. Just from what I said, he goes up with his colleagues, stands behind them, does exactly what I do, because I've told them, you know, once you feel the curve on the floor and you feel your power and your weight carried on the floor, then you really want to have your shoulder blades come almost to touch each other so that your chest expands, and then just allow the top of the skull, the vertebra, to stretch upward, which allows this to relax downward. It also opens up a resonance. See, most people speak in this position that way, but if you think of the windpipe and just aligning the dome right over the windpipe like that, then you even speak differently. There's a lot more. Resonance in that, and you can afford to be very, very relaxed, and everything carries, which it would not carry if you just come off that alignment like that. Then you have to create it. So, there, Hong Yu. Good.
What a wonderful comment. And for anybody wondering how they can get in touch with Peter, before we move forward, here is the link to Peter Masterclasses. You guys can reach out directly because Peter is active in New York and California and online, like we all are right
It's
now.
even better. Right. I'm coming back to New York April 1st, and it probably won't be too long before I can work in person. But actually, the working online in Zoom is really, really fascinating. And what I was saying is this Octavio Rivas, who's got this fabulous voice, actually goes and physically helps the other two wonderful Mexican singers feel physically what I've taught him and what I'm talking about so that they really get it. And I found with the Chinese singers, if I stood behind them and laid a hand on their shoulders so that they relaxed, they would open up. They all had these wonderful, wonderful voices, big, rich voices, much more Italianate, more like the Mexicans than the Koreans and the Japanese, who are used to singing much narrower. They're used to singing on the mask in a more shallow way.
Interesting.
You know,
here's a comment from Emma.
More like traditional Chinese opera. You know, but the Chinese opera singers I worked with, once you gave them permission to use their body, and which I did as simply as standing behind them and resting my arm on the shoulder here, and when it started to get tense, just pulling it down.
Interesting.
And checking the back. Then they opened up their sound and delivered without any worry. I think it's a very important. There's a conflict when you think too much about something. Your body, your voice comes off your body.
Right.
So you need to reconnect it. See, I think we all had perfect operatic technique when we came out of the womb. When you think about it, a baby cries.
Agreed.
And their parent, free, totally free, treble cut, talk about, you know, a bite in front. It's perfect. And then you're a little kid and you're playing around the neighborhood and you're basically using your voice like this, which is really much closer to the operatic kind of phonation. You know, I'm not forcing my voice. I'm just placing it physically. Then you get into school and the teacher says, shh, and you learn how to disconnect your voice from your body.
That's right. That's right.
And to sing opera, you have to learn how to reconnect it.
Yeah, there's no other way. You just cannot lift that kind of weight without knowing how to do it.
And we can't, I guess you could, but it would be a very chaotic life if people didn't alter their speech in class. That would mean that college classes would be as noisy as kindergarten.
Well, you can teach people how to behave, but I don't think you should teach kids to essentially shut up and keep quiet, because what you said happened to me. And actually, when I was an adult in a workplace outside of music environment, I was told to not speak so loudly, projecting my voice. And
because you had a natural placement and they destroyed it. That's what I'm saying.
No, I was so happy. I was like, I'm doing something right if you're giving me this kind of comment. I thought to myself, because I'm an opera singer and that's who I am. So I don't want to be anybody else. I'm not gonna go off the voice because it's somebody thinks it's too loud.
Well, when you think about it, it takes more effort for an opera singer to sing pianissimo because your support has to be even stronger and lower.
Exactly.
And your placement even higher.
Yeah.
But if you don't have that support down, you will not have a beautiful pianissimo that will actually sing in the room, in the hall. So there's no reason that you can't be taught as a child how to rein in that kind of resonance, but still have it in the right place. But unfortunately, people get really like that. They come off their support, and then everything's in the mouth.
And
And
airy.
that's, unfortunately, a lot of pop singers can do that on the mic because they can coast without that physical thing. But you cannot ever get that visceral sound that a few pop singers have. I mean, Aretha Franklin really had a phenomenal sort of operatic voice. It was placed correctly.
The right place. Right place. I think it actually goes all back to support, to control, to understand it, to the technique, understanding what it takes to produce this kind of sounds. And in terms of the comment that you made about the pop singers, I mean, frankly, if they push too much, and we know a few names like this, they end up with vocal problems.
Absolutely. And you look like a lot of sports teachers wind up using their voice like that, and then they get hoarse.
Yeah.
Or school teachers. I mean, your voice you need to learn how to use your voice, whether you're going to sing opera or folk songs or teach a class or just coach people in a game of sports. There's a right way to do it where you can preserve your voice and your vocal health, and a wrong way to do it.
Right.
And so this isn't just about opera singing, but I think opera technique is the most challenging and demanding because the roles require range. For instance, I loved working with you and with Kofi when we did work. You had the languages, you had the musicianship, you had the beauty of the voice, but your support didn't enable you to, at that time, to connect properly to the top and to the bottom in the same rich quality. And so once you supported differently or more, that fell right into line. And that was very exciting. And
thank you, Peter. I think it's a wonderful place to really ask for your advice for younger singers, or actually all singers, because we're all in the same place today under the circumstances. And we all have a vision that the arts and music will return. We hope for it, we pray for it, and we plan for it. So in order to, what would you suggest singers do right now to be prepared for when things come back in a new way, in a better way, so to speak?
That's a very good question. There is no question in my mind that it will be some time before the larger opera houses and even the larger regional houses are able to put a full audience in the seats, which means that their budgets will be compromised, especially here in the United States, where we do not have the support, a government support that a lot of European and other opera houses have. What to do about it? My advice is to really learn your roles and develop your technique, because the more prepared you are once these opera houses open again, the more easy it will be for you to sustain a career. The worst thing to do is to give up and give into the pessimism of not having live performances. It's saddest for those people that are mid-career or early in their careers and really, or just coming out of school and needing to enter into the field, because the transition has been set back. And when these opera houses open at first, they will probably rely on the people they know best first. But with the budget being where it is, it will be highly competitive on the entry level. And most opera companies will do what I did at Virginia Opera for many, many years. And that is hear people who don't have very much on their resume, but who actually have their technique together, their music together, and who are reliable enough and have a unique voice, to hire them and give them a chance. I think there'll be a lot of chances just as soon as the field opens again. Don't be seduced by taking leading roles with very amateur companies. If you're aimed at the top, you have to be in with people. I would rather have you sing a comprimario part in a company that has wonderful vocal, musical, and dramatic standards, because you'll learn from your colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
So many people really opt for a performing outlet of any kind, that there's a lot of pay to play,
Yeah.
you know, and sometimes that's a good thing to do if you want to get the role under your belt. But be very careful, because the rehearsal periods in smaller or amateur companies is much smaller, and your colleagues will not have the professional standards that you're going to need, or the professional attitude that you're going to need in order to work with companies that your talent deserves. I do think this is a perfect period to work on your technique, and I'd be happy to help you. You can certainly come in on my master classes with the Mexicans, which are every Wednesday and Saturday, New York time, from noon to 2 p.m. And if you can put the links up, they can, I'm not, if you're interested, then just audit that and see. And if you like what you see, be in touch with me through my email, which is petermarkopera@gmail.com. All one word, petermarkopera. This masterclass website has a lot of information, but it's not really up to date to the Zoom period because of the virus. We've not been able to hold master classes in person, but we're doing them online. But definitely get in touch with me.
Wonderful. Thank you, Peter, so much. Yeah, please.
Do people have questions for me here?
I think we had just wonderful comments. And Emma, one of our co-founders of DictionBuddy, commented, very interesting to watch the physical work with the great tenor.
Yes.
Here's one more.
He did really, really well. I brought him to Virginia, Chi Li Ming, to sing Romeo in the Gounod Romeo and Juliet.
Mm-hmm.
And I put him with a Chinese soprano, Wei Huang, who had been Mimi on Broadway. Yes, because to my mind, the two lovers being Chinese made a point that needs making in the world. With the warring Capulets and Montagues, you have two people that are soulmates, and they can rise over all of that if you end the story differently. But
it's a wonderful final word, Peter, because love for music and love for others and for yourself will overcome anything and everything.
Well, I'm in this field. I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm sure you all share exactly what I feel. You want to give the best of yourself to help make other people the best of themselves.
Yeah.
That we are all part of the human race, and we are much more alike than we're different. The differences can be very educational. They can show you where you've been in a very tight, unnecessarily prejudiced viewpoint. So the fact that opera is international, not only the composers, but the singers and the conductors, I mean, that's the world I love living in. And we all feel very similarly about the spiritual uplift of dedicating yourself to the world of opera. The business could be very trying, and sometimes it's very corrupt also, but the art form is not. And that's what we're dedicated towards. So yes, I would love to help people be the best that they can be of themselves as a singer.
Wonderful, Peter. We thank you very much. Again, this is Peter Mark's website. Please feel free to reach out and explore what offering he has there for master classes. We also really thank you for spending this hour with us and imparting your wisdom, sharing your experiences. We're really happy to know you and to have you as a guest today. Here's DictionBuddy information for anyone who is learning new repertoire so that they go out and perform their wonderful roles and certainly have an opportunity to do so very soon in the future. Viva la musica, viva la opera. Thank you, Peter, so much. Thank you, everybody who came to hear us.
Do you have a chance to put the links up for the Chinese workshops? Okay, good. Thank you.
There you go. It's going to be a link for the Peter Mark masterclasses, and I believe they'll be able to.
Okay.
Yes.
Just be in touch with me.
Yes,
good.
Final comment. Thank you so much, Honju.
All right, Honju Chen, look forward to meeting you. Good.
Wonderful. Peter, again, thank you so much. And God bless you.
Onward.
Wonderful. Bye-bye, everybody.